my channel. The video that you're about to watch is my journey with intuitive eating. Thanks to a lot of your feedback on my Instagram posts and your comments and things like that, I wanted to address how I define intuitive eating for me, some of the struggles that I've gone through in dealing with intuitive eating, and some of the really amazing benefits. I like to eat a lower fat diet, a higher carb diet, and a mid-range protein diet. So that is sort of how I started my journey into intuitive eating with those things in mind, and then just allowed myself a lot more flexibility. So hope you enjoy the video. Talk to you soon. Bye. So how do I define intuitive eating for me? For some people, intuitive eating for them is going to mean that they just eat like a normal person. They don't even think about macros. They don't even think about weighing anything. They don't even consider the fact that there are numerical figures that they want to hit. That is not my definition of intuitive eating. After I had been tracking for 2.5 to 3 years, it is impossible for me to unknow the knowledge that I already know. It is impossible for me to look at an item like an apple or something and not know, hey, that's got 27 grams of carbs in it on average if I have a big pink lady apple. I know the macros and things like the back of my hand. So for me, it was sort of a by default movement towards intuitive eating, that I knew I could still hit my caloric and maybe even macro goals, but not be meticulously tracking it all the time and being obsessive with knowing where I'm at all the time throughout every single day. So intuitive eating for me is knowing the macro levels that I kind of want to be at, but being okay if I don't hit those things perfectly every single day. The biggest question that I get asked is, what does intuitive eating look like for you day in and day out? So I do intermittent fasting. I do it purely for psychological reasons because I like to eat a lot of food later in the day. I do not like eating breakfast. I've never have throughout my entire life since I was a kid. I start eating every day around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, and then I will eat until probably 11 or 12 at night. That is my personal preference. I've done an entire video about that, and I will link down to it in the little box below. So I start eating at around 2 or 3 o'clock. I'll have a meal and then I will go and train. What I like to do is eat lots of little meals throughout the day. My client Catherine, she eats 2 or 3 meals a day. That's how she functions. She does not like to snack. She likes big meals all at once. I do not. I like eating little meals every day. So what I do is estimate that every meal should be around 200 calories, and I have 9 or 10 meals a day. So my first meal usually will be like a protein bar, or it'll be a piece of fruit with like some toast and like peanut butter or something like that. And I know that the macros around that will get me to around 200 calories because if you've been tracking macros for long enough, you know the calories that are in things. And then I might have, say, Icon Meals popcorn. Well, Icon Meals popcorn, I know the macros on it. It's 153 calories. It's 3 fat, 21.5 carb, and 10 protein. So 150 calories. That'll be another snack I'll have throughout the day. But then later on, I'll have like an egg sandwich, and that'll be, you know, in the past when I used to track it, 250 calories. So that 150 from the popcorn and the 250 from the egg sandwich, I mean, that evens out to around 200 calories per meal. Then I might have a dessert later, like an oatmeal or something that's gonna be 300 calories, but I'll also have had a smaller snack like a piece of fruit that was just 100 calories, right? So it's all within kind of ratios of 200 calories throughout the day, and I have 9 to 10 meals. That ends up getting me to around 1,900 calories per day. And if I still feel like at the end of the night that I am hungry and that I, you know, haven't had enough fuel, then I'll just eat and not even worry about it. Don't even care. Sometimes that's when I'll end up having like couple spoonfuls of cookie butter, or like the other night I had like 3 bowls of Cheerios because that's what I wanted. I think that's a really good tip for someone starting out with intuitive eating, is to do things within kind of ratios. Now, say you only eat 4 meals a day and you know that your maintenance calories are around 2,000 calories, well, make them, you know, 500 calorie big meals throughout the day. Figure out the ratio, and that's where you can start and you can move yourself into intuitive eating, and then eventually you're not gonna have to worry about that. You'll just consistently eat those same things, and you can sub things in and out depending around that ratio that you've set for yourself. One of the biggest parts of intuitive eating that's been a benefit for me has been my ability to eat things that I do crave or things that I craved back when I was macro tracking. So things that I would have had to really fuss around fitting in, now I don't feel that weight. I don't feel beleaguered by having to fit things in that I wouldn't normally and then having to shift the rest of my days of macros. I think with the consistent eating every day, the things that I really like to eat, and because I have such a nice balance of like savory foods and sweet foods, nutrient dense foods and not so nutrient dense foods, I really don't have a lot of cravings anymore. And I mean that with full honesty. When I was tracking macros, I had way worse cravings than I do now with intuitive eating. If you have a craving over here and you have you over here, the macros kind of sit in between you. And at least for me, the macros were what limited me from being able to indulge in that craving. I would think all the time, okay, here's this donut that I can't fit because I can't fit it into macros. Well, once I released the macros from in between me and the donut and I was able to meet those donuts face to face, the craving kind of just went away. It was a psychological thing. I think keeping yourself back from something for so long, and even with macro tracking, when you are able to make things fit, make things work, having to sort of manipulate macros around in order to make that thing fit into your daily consumption, that was still sort of a sense of anxiety and stress for me. But it actually increased my cravings for things that I couldn't have because they couldn't fit perfectly into my macros. But now that I don't have those macros separating me from the donuts or from the ice cream or from the Oreos or even just from something savory like chips or something, then I really just don't crave them anymore. I don't know if that's gonna be the way that it is for everyone. And there are still times when I do have cravings and I want to overindulge on one of my particular favorite foods, but I'm not so held back anymore, so the craving feeling sort of dissipates. So I don't drink, and a huge part of the reason why I stopped drinking years ago was because it wasn't macro conducive. The other day, Kyle and I had wine and I didn't even think about it. I wasn't like, oh, how would I fit this in? How would I make the macros work? There have been other times where we've gone out and I've been able to eat desserts that I wouldn't have normally eaten. Or when my mom and I went out to dinner, when I went and visited her, and I had this huge pile of Brussels sprouts that was probably covered in all kinds of butter and fat and oil and whatever. And I didn't even think twice about it because that's something that I craved. I saw it on the menu. I said, I love Brussels sprouts. I love it when it's covered in butter. So I'm gonna take a lot of Lactaid, and I know that it's gonna probably make me feel a little bit uncomfortable, but you know, I got to enjoy it with my mom and it was a great experience. There are sometimes meals, especially now as a newer vegetarian, someone who wants to try out like certain vegetarian dishes, and instead of worrying so much about trying to fit those things in, because most vegetarian dishes are really carb intensive, right? There's lots of grains in them. I just eat it because I want to, and it's such a great feeling. But there is this kind of line between eating what I'm craving and not overindulging. A really common question then is, how do you not go overboard? How do you give yourself permission to eat what you want? Well, again, I know that I'm eating what I want, but if that still doesn't satisfy me at the end of the day, then I give myself permission to have more. And I think the reason that I don't go overboard is because I know what going overboard makes me feel like. I mentioned this last year on my birthday, that I was just gonna have a completely free day. I could have had anything that I wanted, but I really kind of chose to just eat normally and not go crazy and not eat 1,600 donuts and a whole pint of Ben & Jerry's and then have this crazy dinner with all these appetizers, because I knew what that would make me feel like afterwards. I know that that makes me sick to my stomach. I know that the next morning I'm gonna wake up and I'm gonna feel gross, like I'm gonna feel bloated, I'm gonna feel like I'm retaining water. I don't like that feeling. And so I chose not to put myself in a position where I was going to feel that way. So the same thing happens with intuitive eating now. I know I could eat whatever I wanted to, but I also know that if I stick within my consistent consumption, it's gonna make my body feel better day to day to day to day to day. I like consistency. I've said this many times. As an ESTJ, I like rules, I like order. So stepping away from macros was kind of scary for me. But it's also been very liberating in the sense that I can still feel good about what I'm consuming from day in and day out and not be so meticulous and perfect all the time. And so I think you really need to find that balance between, all right, I'm going to consume what I want, but I'm not gonna place myself in a position where I'm gonna feel sick the next day. You've gotta trust yourself not to do those things because you know the end result, right? Everything is kind of connected. So at least that's for me, that's how I frame kind of my understanding of intuitive eating is I'm not gonna go overboard because I know how that would make me feel. Intuitive eating allows me to just consume what I want without having kind of this hounding fear of, okay, yeah, I could eat that, but then I'd have to shift my macros around throughout the day. Now it's just like, yeah, I mean, sure, I guess I would estimate that's about 600 calories. So, and it's probably this many grams of fat. All right, I mean, so that would take up a couple of these meals. So what I'll just do is I'll make sure I'm not gonna have this protein bar today, and I'm not gonna have, one of my staple meals for the day, and I'll just make this like one of the larger meals. And that's how I just sub things in if we do go out to eat. So there's gonna be a lot of people who will say, well, how do you know? Like, how do you know how to listen to your body? So when you are in a constant state of a deficit, you are restricting your body's natural hunger cues and you're messing with leptin and ghrelin and all these hunger hormones. For me, I didn't know what that meant at first. Like, what do you mean to like listen to my body? Like, I'm eating right now, but I feel like I'm overeating right now because I had been so restrictive with my intake up until that point, especially because I had, cut for so many weeks. So it took a long time, I think, for my hormones to start to re-regulate. Sometimes like I mentioned, I would go out to eat with friends and we'll end up eating something that I could estimate would probably be around 600, 700 calories. And I'll feel like, oh shoot, did I overeat? Did I overindulge? And I have to remind myself, no, you didn't. Your stomach is just fuller than normal. So that's, I think, was a really cool realization for me over the course of time, that this feeling of like hyper fullness that I once associated with overeating or binging was now just my body saying like, hey, we're full, and this is what real fullness feels like, because you're not used to that when you're over restricting your calories and you're in a deficit for so long. I would recommend that if you are going to attempt intuitive eating, that in order to combat that feeling of going overboard or overindulging, that you start to like give yourself permission to take some time to figure out what actual fullness and hunger feels like for you. You figure out how to listen to your body when you stop tracking macros and being completely dependent upon those numbers as crutches instead of as safety nets. You've got to give yourself permission to see macros as just a safety net. It's just a tendency. It's just something maybe that your body can adapt to, but the body is very capable of adapting to all different types of numbers depending upon what is going to make you feel better. So through years of experimentation, I figured out what works for me. So my intuitive eating is still, a ballpark range of certain macro levels, but it's not a meticulous, I must hit this number every single day to meet my goals, because I don't have some goal to reach. I don't have some weight loss goal to reach. And I think that segues really nicely into a conversation about guilt. Someone on my Instagram post, she did mention, how do you not feel guilty about allowing yourself to eat those foods, whatever. I just don't associate food with guilt anymore. That's a huge part of it. I see them as mutually exclusive. Food doesn't hold guilt with me anymore. And that took me a long time to get there. Slowly introduce those foods that you once felt guilty about into your diet. And that's what I was able to do with If It Fits Your Macros. And because I stopped associating like certain types of food as being bad food or guilt-ridden food, it made this transition into intuitive eating a lot easier. And again, that it's really connected to this idea of like, could I eat like 14 like pints of ice cream? Yeah, sure I could, but I choose not to. And I'm not gonna feel guilt about it if I do go overboard, like occasionally. For example, Many of you know that my trigger food is nut butters or cookie butter. I will sit there and eat half a jar of cookie butter. And I'm gonna beat myself up about the fact that I did that, not because I care so much about the weight gain or why this food is problematic or something, but more so I'm like, shit, I'm gonna feel like shit tomorrow. And so those sort of like overindulgences have slowly been stripped away from my diet because I don't want to feel that way. I really just don't associate guilt with food anymore. And I think if you still do, then that's something that you need to work on before you would move into intuitive eating. One struggle that I have really run into though is sometimes when I just eat intuitively during a day, I just won't have crazy hunger appetite one day, and the next day I'll go and train and I'll feel sluggish. I'll get upset about that because I should say, you know, like this is, if I had just tracked macros, I would have been eating something more consistently. Maybe my training would have gone better today. But I'll just sort of compensate by eating more that day of the training. You know, bad training days can be associated with lots of things, not just your food intake. It can be about your mobility, about your rest, about, you know, whatever. But I have run into problems sometimes where training feels sluggish, and it's likely because I hadn't eaten enough the day before or several days leading up to that. And then, I mean, my solution with that is just, you know, making myself eat more that day so I can refuel my body. Someone asked about my protein intake, and my protein intake is maybe around 130 to 145 grams a day. And I know that for a fact because before I started doing intuitive eating, especially as a vegetarian, I needed to make sure I want to hit these macro limits. I know protein is so important for someone, especially me as a vegetarian. And so I made sure, okay, in order for me to hit that protein level, I'm gonna have to have a really protein dense dessert like the egg white angel food cake every day. I'm gonna have to have an egg sandwich. I'm gonna have 2 protein bars, and I'm gonna have 2 staple meals with the Explore Asian pasta. That's gonna allow me to hit 130 grams of protein. So I just keep that in the back of my mind. I know in order for me to hit that level, I'm gonna have to supplement with protein bars and with staple meals with the Explore Asian pasta and so on. Most vegetarians, I don't think, have a problem hitting protein as long as you're conscious of, you know, the alternative non-meat protein sources that you're getting your protein from. So some people will ask, how do you hit sugar? How do you hit fiber? Do you care about sodium? Sugar's never affected me, doesn't really bother me. So I've never tracked sugar. Even when I was tracking macros, I never tracked sugar. I guess I hit around 60 to 65 grams a day, but it never concerned me, to be honest with you. Some people, sugar's gonna affect them in, you know, way worse ways than it affects me. Fiber, I still make sure that the protein bars that I'm eating are fiber rich. And also if I feel like I'm backed up or something like that, I'll drink some Metamucil, but that's never been a problem with me. Sodium, I can definitely estimate when I'm having way too much sodium. So I avoid adding additional seasonings, high sodium seasonings to the meals that I eat. So I really don't know where my sodium sits, but I know that the sodium that I'm intaking definitely affects my body. So if I'm feeling bloated, if I'm feeling like I'm holding a lot of water, it's probably because I had way too much sodium on my food the night before. Another person asked if I thought that intuitive eating was good for someone who is focusing on weight loss. And I'm gonna say no. I really don't think it is the best, most efficient or pragmatic option for someone who is seeking weight loss. And let me tell you why. When you are seeking weight loss, the best and most efficient and pragmatic way to do it is to do the math. I mean, calories in, calories out. You burn calories through training, you burn calories through cardio. If you are looking for consistent, I mean, and obviously the body doesn't work in absolutes, so you're never gonna see weight loss being linear. But if you're looking for consistent weight loss, then intuitive eating is probably not the best idea because there are too many variables, right? With my intuitive eating, I don't really have a consistent number of calories I'm eating day to day, but I know that over the course of time, I'm probably netting around maintenance, and I can go over that if I want because I'm not holding myself to this standard of I want to lose weight. If you have a goal in mind, I want to lose weight, I want to lose fat, the most efficient way to do that is through doing the math. So do I think that you cannot lose weight doing intuitive eating? No, like you can definitely lose weight doing intuitive eating. if you are netting a deficit amount of calories every day, like in the same way that I do, I know that I'm netting a deficit, or a maintenance level of calories every day. I mean, you can do it, but I just, in terms of the framework of it being efficient and pragmatic, I think that macro tracking or having a meal plan is probably a better option because you know that there are less variables when you're looking for that consistent weight loss over time. And one more note on that, because Kyle just reminded me, if you did intuitive eating for weight loss purposes, if you at one point you stall, what are you gonna change, right? You don't have documentation of the macros that you've consumed over time. So what would you alter? Like if you didn't exactly know where your carbs or where your fats or whatever were at, that would be much more difficult for you to make assessments. I guess you could increase cardio, or I guess you could experiment from that point on. But again, it would just make so much more sense to have those macros diligently tracked so that you can make better assessments moving forward. I do believe that my intuitive eating is really intricately connected with my desire to treasure and to enjoy the in-between when I'm not pursuing, actively at least, some kind of competition or some kind of weight loss goal. And actually my goal, for all intents and purposes, is really just to enjoy living my life, and still live a healthy lifestyle, to still be mindful of the food that I'm eating, but doing those things intuitively instead of perfectly tracking those things. I give myself more flexibility, I give myself more leeway, and I give myself more permission. So I think, a lot of people, it's hard for them to think about intuitive eating and kind of that freedom, because they're still locked into macros. They're still locked into sort of a more restrictive mindset. Not necessarily that that's a bad thing, but they're just sort of in that kind of structure, in that space. My space is much more open, so I don't fear the cravings, or I don't fear the idea that maybe I'll overindulge. But I think that the fact that I feel really comfortable over here is difficult for other people who are tracking macros to understand, because they're still just in a different mindset than where I'm at. So thank you guys again for watching. I really appreciate you, and I hope that we can have more conversations like this in the future. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.